Ladies and gentlemen, let's confront something deeply perplexing, perhaps even painful. If he craves you, desires you, why is he silent? Why doesn't he just say it? Why doesn't he act? You might think the answer is simple, maybe he doesn't care. But no, it's far more complicated and far more uncomfortable than that. You see, silence isn't always absence. Sometimes silence is fear. Not the fear of rejection in the shallow sense, but something deeper, more existential. It's the fear of inadequacy, the terror of vulnerability. When a man desires something profoundly, truly craves it, whether it's love, connection, or acceptance, it exposes the very parts of him he's unsure about. And to reveal those weaknesses feels like stepping into a battlefield without armor. And now let me be clear, this isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. Because at his core, a man who stays silent might be caught in a war between wanting and worthiness. Society often tells men they must be strong, composed, unfazed. But craving someone, needing someone, requires the opposite. It requires surrender. And that's terrifying for anyone raised to believe that surrender equals weakness. But here's the shocking truth. Silence can also be a strategy, whether conscious or not. It might be a test of whether you will close the gap, whether you will validate his unspoken feelings. Or worse, it might be a shield, protecting him from outcomes he's convinced are inevitable. Why speak if the answer will be rejection? Why try if failure seems certain? Now, what do you do with this information? You don't chase. No, that would only affirm his fear of inadequacy. Instead, you stand still with clarity. You hold space for honesty. You invite conversation, but you don't pull it out of him. Because growth doesn't happen when someone else does the heavy lifting. And for the men listening, silence won't protect you. It won't make you stronger. If you crave something, speak it. Risk the fall, because only by facing that fear will you ever find genuine connection. In the end, silence isn't about indifference. It's about fear, strategy, and the fragile architecture of human vulnerability. And the most shocking truth? Sometimes the deepest craving is hidden behind the loudest silence. Craving, in its rawest form, is an intense, often uncontrollable desire for something deeply meaningful. It's not merely a passing want or a fleeting attraction. It's a hunger that sits beneath the surface, influencing thoughts, emotions. When someone craves another person, it goes beyond physical attraction. It's tied to a longing for connection, validation, and emotional fulfillment. This kind of craving can be all-consuming, leading individuals to think constantly about the object of their desire, imagining scenarios and overanalyzing every interaction. It's a psychological pull that becomes difficult to ignore, no matter how hard someone tries to suppress it. What's fascinating about craving is that it reveals vulnerability. To crave someone means to acknowledge a need, and needs are often perceived as weaknesses, especially in cultures that prize independence and self-sufficiency. Admitting that you desire someone else's presence, affection, or validation requires an internal reckoning with your own emotional openness. This makes craving both powerful and terrifying. It becomes easier for some to remain silent rather than risk exposing their deepest yearnings. Craving can also lead to internal conflict. There's a constant battle between the desire to reach out and the fear of rejection. That tension can be paralyzing, leaving someone stuck in a cycle of wanting but never acting. For those on the receiving end, this silence can be confusing or even hurtful, as the depth of the craving remains hidden beneath layers of hesitation. Yet the craving doesn't fade, it grows stronger in silence, feeding on the very distance created by fear and uncertainty. Understanding craving as a force of emotional depth rather than just a superficial longing helps reveal why silence often masks the most intense feelings. Silence is often misunderstood as a lack of interest or emotion, but in reality it can be a powerful communicator of internal struggles and unspoken desires. When someone remains silent despite craving connection, it's rarely because they feel nothing. Rather, it's because they feel too much and don't know how to express it. Silence can be a defense mechanism, a way to avoid vulnerability or shield oneself from the fear of rejection and inadequacy. Instead of risking exposure, some choose silence as a form of self-protection, believing that withholding their feelings will keep them safe from potential hurt. In many cases, silence is a reflection of internal chaos. The mind becomes a battleground of conflicting thoughts. Desire pulls in one direction, fear in another. This inner turmoil can lead to hesitation, second-guessing, and eventually withdrawal. For those watching from the outside, this silence often feels confusing or even cold, but Beneath it lies a complex emotional reality that isn't always easy to articulate. The individual may be afraid of appearing weak or being misunderstood, so they opt for silence over taking a risk that could lead to emotional pain. Silence can also act as a form of control. By not speaking, a person maintains a sense of power over their vulnerability. They don't have to face the possibility of rejection or judgment because they've never exposed their true feelings in the first place. Ironically, though, this silence often becomes its own prison, creating a barrier to the very connection they crave. Rather than bringing clarity or relief, silence tends to deepen feelings of loneliness and longing, leaving both parties trapped in a cycle of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. Fear, particularly in the context of relationships and desire, is one of the most powerful emotions shaping human behavior. It operates beneath the surface, influencing actions or inactions, often without conscious awareness. When someone craves connection but remains silent, fear is usually at the heart of that hesitation. This fear isn't always about rejection alone. It can be fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, or even fear of success and the responsibilities that come with deep emotional connection. The idea of being truly seen by another person can be overwhelming, especially for those who have been hurt in the past or who struggle with self-worth. Fear can manifest in various ways: avoidance, withdrawal, overthinking, or perfectionism. It creates a mental loop where every potential action is weighed against imagined worst-case scenarios. What if they don't feel the same way? What if I'm not good enough? What if this changes everything? These questions often paralyze the person, leading to inaction. Even when the desire for connection is strong, the fear of humiliation, of exposing one's deepest emotions and being dismissed, can outweigh the hope of acceptance. At its core, fear thrives on uncertainty. The unknown outcomes of expressing feelings can seem riskier than remaining silent, even if silence brings its own kind of pain. This internal struggle can become exhausting, leaving a person emotionally drained without ever having taken visible action. The fear also feeds on past experiences, rejections, betrayals, or failures that reinforce the idea that silence is safe. Over time, this fear can become a habit, turning what could have been a moment of honesty and growth into another missed opportunity for connection. In this way, fear controls not just actions, but the potential for meaningful relationships altogether. Vulnerability is the emotional state of being open to uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It requires a person to lower their defenses and reveal their true thoughts, feelings, and desires, without any guarantee of how those revelations will be received. In the context of craving someone, vulnerability means admitting not just attraction, but need, an acknowledgement that the other person has the power to either accept or reject what is being offered. This admission can be terrifying, especially in a society that often equates vulnerability with weakness or loss of control. For many, the fear of vulnerability stems from past experiences where openness was met with judgment, rejection, or indifference. These moments create emotional scars, making it difficult to believe that future vulnerability will lead to a different outcome. The instinct to protect oneself becomes stronger than the desire to connect, and silence becomes a shield against potential pain. Ironically, this very shield often prevents the intimacy and closeness the individual longs for in the first place. Being vulnerable also means embracing uncertainty. There's no way to predict how someone else will respond to honest feelings, and this lack of control can be deeply unsettling. It forces a person to confront the uncomfortable truth that relationships by nature involve risk. However, without vulnerability, meaningful connection remains out of reach. People may engage in surface-level interactions, but the depth that comes from true emotional honesty is absent. This hesitation to be vulnerable can create distance even in relationships that have the potential for deep connection. It becomes a silent barrier, invisible yet powerful, that prevents two people from fully understanding each other. The paradox is that while vulnerability feels like exposure to harm, it is also the very foundation of trust, intimacy, and genuine emotional connection. Inadequacy is a deeply rooted feeling that stems from the belief that one is not good enough, capable enough, or deserving of love and connection. When someone feels inadequate, it colors their perceptions of themselves and their interactions with others, often leading them to question their worth in both subtle and overt ways. In the context of craving another person, feelings of inadequacy can become a significant barrier, convincing someone that their desires are unrealistic or that they're not worthy of reciprocated affection. This sense of inadequacy can be shaped by personal experiences, societal expectations, or internalized beliefs. Past failures, rejections, or negative feedback often reinforce the idea that one's efforts will never be enough. As a result, even when someone genuinely craves connection, their internal narrative convinces them that speaking up or acting on those feelings will only confirm their deepest fears. This belief often leads to silence, as withholding feelings seems safer than risking the pain of potential rejection. Inadequacy also distorts self-perception. Instead of recognizing their strengths or positive qualities, individuals focus on perceived flaws, whether physical, emotional, or intellectual. This self-doubt becomes a filter through which all interactions are interpreted. Compliments may be dismissed as pity, kindness may be viewed with suspicion, and silence becomes a defense against further disappointment. The paradox is that feelings of inadequacy are often invisible to others. From the outside, the person may appear confident, composed, or even distant, when in reality they are consumed by self-doubt. This internal struggle creates a disconnect between how someone feels and how they are perceived. Ultimately, inadequacy keeps people trapped in silence, afraid to reach for what they truly desire, even when the opportunity for connection is within their grasp. Rejection is one of the most profound emotional fears humans experience, and it holds the power to shape behavior in subtle but significant ways. At its core, rejection threatens the very sense of belonging and self-worth that people naturally crave. When someone desires another person deeply, the fear of rejection can become overwhelming, often leading to silence as a form of self-protection. It's not just the potential loss of a connection that's frightening. It's the validation of their deepest insecurities, the confirmation that they are not enough. This fear often operates beneath conscious awareness. It can manifest as hesitation, avoidance, or a refusal to express true feelings, all designed to prevent the painful experience of being dismissed. For many, the idea of risking emotional exposure feels unbearable, especially if past experiences have reinforced the belief that vulnerability leads to hurt. In this way, rejection becomes not just a possible outcome, but a looming certainty in the mind of someone who already struggles with self-doubt. Ironically, the fear of rejection often leads to self-sabotage. By remaining silent, individuals protect themselves from hearing a definitive no, but they also eliminate any chance of receiving a yes. This creates a cycle of missed opportunities, where the need for connection remains unfulfilled because the risk was never taken. In some cases, people even interpret neutral responses as rejection, projecting their own insecurities onto situations where no rejection has actually occurred. The pain associated with rejection isn't just emotional, it has psychological and physiological effects as well. Studies have shown that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, making the experience feel both mentally and physically real. This intensity explains why people often go to great lengths to avoid it, even if it means sacrificing potential happiness or connection. Strategy in the context of silence and desire is often an unconscious or deliberate choice to control the outcome of a vulnerable situation. When someone craves another person but chooses not to express it openly, this silence can become a tactic to maintain a sense of power, avoid rejection, or gauge the other person's feelings first. Rather than risking the vulnerability of direct communication, they might rely on subtle signals, indirect actions, or emotional withdrawal to see if the other person will make the first move. This strategic silence is a way of protecting one's ego while still holding on to the hope of connection. In some cases, the strategy is rooted in uncertainty. The person might believe that withholding their feelings will increase their perceived value, operating under the assumption that people desire what feels elusive or unattainable. By remaining silent, they attempt to create intrigue or maintain a position of emotional leverage. However, this approach can backfire, leading to misunderstandings and missed opportunities, as the other person may interpret the silence as disinterest or rejection. On a deeper level, strategy can also be a way of testing boundaries. By staying silent, individuals observe how the other person reacts, whether they reach out, show concern, or pull away. This reaction can offer insight into how much the other person values the connection. Yet relying too heavily on strategy can erode genuine intimacy. Relationships built on games and unspoken expectations often lack the foundation of trust and honesty necessary for long-term connection. In some situations, strategy emerges from fear rather than manipulation. It becomes a defense mechanism designed to navigate emotional risk while still leaving the door open for potential connection. However, when strategy replaces sincerity, it often leads to confusion, frustration, and a growing emotional distance between two people who might otherwise share mutual feelings. Connection is a fundamental human need, deeply rooted in the desire for belonging, understanding, and emotional intimacy. It goes beyond surface-level interactions and taps into the need to be seen, heard, and accepted for who we truly are. When someone craves another person, the longing isn't just about attraction or companionship. It's often about forming a bond that feels genuine and meaningful. However, the fear of vulnerability, rejection, or inadequacy can create barriers to achieving this connection, leading to silence even when the desire for closeness is strong. True connection requires openness and mutual recognition. It demands that both individuals share their thoughts, emotions, and experiences without fear of judgment. Yet, for many, this level of honesty feels risky. The possibility of being misunderstood or rejected can be enough to prevent someone from reaching out, even when the craving for connection is overwhelming. This internal conflict creates a space where silence grows, not because the feelings are absent, but because the fear of breaking the illusion of safety is stronger. Connection also thrives on reciprocity. When one person remains silent, the opportunity for a meaningful exchange diminishes. The other person may misinterpret the silence as disinterest or detachment, leading to a breakdown in communication. Over time, this disconnect can create feelings of isolation on both sides, even if the desire for closeness remains unchanged. In many cases, the fear of disrupting the current dynamic prevents deeper connection. People may stay silent to avoid rocking the boat, especially if the relationship feels fragile or uncertain. Yet this hesitation often results in missed chances for growth and understanding. Without the courage to speak openly, the potential for true connection remains unrealized, leaving both individuals stuck in a cycle of unspoken longing and emotional distance. Worthiness is the belief that one is deserving of love, connection, and acceptance. It plays a critical role in how people approach relationships and express their desires. When someone feels unworthy, it can prevent them from pursuing the connections they crave, no matter how deeply those feelings run. This sense of unworthiness often stems from past experiences, societal pressures, or internalized beliefs that suggest they are not good enough to receive the affection or attention they seek. As a result, even when the opportunity for meaningful connection is present, they may remain silent, convinced that expressing their feelings will lead to disappointment or rejection. This internal struggle shapes the way people interpret interactions with others. Compliments might be dismissed as insincere, acts of kindness might be met with suspicion, and genuine interest from another person could be seen as a misunderstanding rather than an honest reflection of one's value. The fear of being found out as inadequate can be so powerful that it prevents any attempt at vulnerability or openness, reinforcing a cycle of isolation and self-doubt. The feeling of unworthiness doesn't just affect self-perception, it also influences behavior. People who don't believe they are worthy of love often hold themselves back, avoiding opportunities for closeness or pushing others away before they have the chance to connect. This self-sabotage becomes a protective mechanism, shielding them from the pain of possible rejection, but also keeping them from experiencing genuine connection. Ironically, worthiness isn't something granted by others, it's a belief that must be cultivated internally. Until someone believes they deserve love and connection, no external validation will feel genuine. This mindset of inadequacy can keep individuals locked in silence, unable to take the risks necessary for building relationships that could prove their deepest fears wrong. Honesty is the foundation of authentic connection and meaningful relationships. It requires the courage to express true thoughts, feelings, and intentions without fear of judgment or rejection. In the context of craving someone, honesty becomes both a risk and a necessity. Many people choose silence over honesty because they fear the consequences of revealing their desires, whether it's being misunderstood, rejected, or losing the current dynamic of the relationship. Yet, without honesty, the possibility of forming a genuine connection remains out of reach. Being honest with oneself is the first step. It involves acknowledging feelings without dismissing or rationalizing them away. Many individuals suppress their desires out of fear, convincing themselves that their emotions are insignificant or unwelcome. This internal dishonesty creates a disconnect between what they feel and how they act, often leading to frustration and confusion in their interactions with others. Honesty with others, however, requires vulnerability. It means taking the risk of exposing true feelings, even when the outcome is uncertain. This openness can be terrifying, especially if past experiences have taught someone that their honesty will be met with rejection or indifference. Still, withholding the truth often leads to misunderstanding, missed opportunities, and a sense of emotional isolation. Ironically, silence, often used as a shield against vulnerability, can be perceived as dishonesty by those on the receiving end. It leaves room for assumptions and misinterpretations, which can create emotional distance. True honesty isn't about forcing feelings onto someone else, but about creating the space for authentic interaction. It allows both individuals to understand where they stand and whether a meaningful connection is possible. Without honesty, relationships remain surface level, unable to grow into something deeper, and the craving for true connection remains unfulfilled.